Hello, I would like to welcome Amy. So we're going to have a conversation about some of the symptoms that Amy was experiencing during 2021, which could be contributed to long COVID, POTS type symptoms. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what was going on in your life around that time when you started with these symptoms?
Yeah, so it was spring of 2021. In society at large, we were getting the first vaccine at that point, but there was still quite a lot of restrictions. And I had a 9-month-old child who I had had at the height of the pandemic. And quite a few things were shifting in my life, in part because the vaccine came. So all of a sudden, I'd had quite a lot of fear about COVID, possibly because I had a newborn and asthma and things like that. And I'd always been very anxious about people getting too close, but all of a sudden, some people had a vaccine, some didn't, and some people were getting really close, and you were suddenly expected to kind of just start life again. And then on top of that, because I had the vaccine, I went back to work in person for the first time, just part-time. And then to make that possible, because I didn't want to send my son to nursery in the pandemic, I did a baby swap with a friend. So on my days I wasn't working, I was looking after 2 babies. So life was suddenly quite busy. But I think looking back, the most significant thing was that we had had a really bad sleeper, to the point that, I mean, our son for months had woken up every hour to 2 hours. And we had spent months just on edge all night. If he woke up, it would take 40 minutes to get him back down again. I remember creeping around the house for months on end. And at this point, when he turned 9 months, it was so marked to me when the symptoms started, because we finally sleep trained him. He slept through the night on the first night and every night thereafter. And I remember thinking, I'm finally getting sleep. Why do I feel so unwell? I didn't kind of keep notes at this point. So, but just from memory, it was this overwhelming exhaustion, grogginess, what I would now call brain fog, but I didn't have the words for it at the time. Um, and uh, and then just you don't keep track at the time because you assume this will pass. But I think gradually over those next few months, I started to realize I was feeling weird anxiety symptoms, just physical ones, sort of very like jittery, on edge without an obvious trigger. And then anger, like I remember feeling lots of anger, which is really unlike me. And then I think the final thing was everybody got quite ill at that time, once we were finally mixing again. And the colds that I would get, like a new cold or new symptoms of a cold that was really bad every week. And and then with that was this real dizziness. And of course, with 2 babies, I'm up and down all the time. And I really remember just having to sit down on the sofa. Yeah. And I mean, gradually things just, I just assumed they would get better, but actually, if anything, they just got a bit worse over time until I actually stopped work about 5 months later, because I was at the point where I just was like, I just feel so terrible. I need to stop something, and can't stop being a parent. So if I just focus on that one thing, stay at home with my son, reduce some of the overwhelm, it might help. And actually, for a time, it did. And but then things started to get worse again. So
Can you describe some of the symptoms that you were experiencing around this time? You've already mentioned brain fog, but what else was going on in terms of symptoms?
yeah, well, at this time, they did actually. I partly can't remember. I can explain in a minute. I really started tracking them about a year later. And so I have my long list of sort of 20 symptoms then. I picked up a few really random ones. Like I had just a bad cold, and then coming out the other end of that, I had such itchy skin and skin rashes, on my face, and dermatographia. So even if I was just lightly touched, my skin would swell up with this histamine response, like a kind of right on my skin. And then a few months later, I really started experiencing breathing problems, and it was a few days after my third vaccine. And so I was quite scared by that. But I just remember trying to read to my son and having to just gasp for breath between each sentence. I was getting so out of breath, just doing mild daily activities. And eventually that one, nothing else did improve, but that one slightly reduced to be more like a feeling that my throat's being squeezed, like a throat tightness and chest pressure. So really this brain fog, this exhaustion, dizziness, illnesses, tight throat and skin issues by that point. And I didn't actually see a doctor until a year later, and went with my collection of symptoms. I think I had felt I was noticing a bit of a hormonal rhythm to them, but I don't know. And that was the start of many appointments and many tests, and everything came up, just not, with no progress, nothing showed up that could explain what was going on. And that really was a sort of a step up in fear for me, because if the medical professionals couldn't help, then if they couldn't even find what was wrong, how I was going to work on it and how was it going to get any better. It was a year in by this point. Yeah, but I mean, I mentioned sorry.
No, you carry on.
Well, I mentioned that things did get even worse, and that really happened sort of a year and a half later. I finally reached the point where I thought, enough is enough. Like, I've tried some odd things along the way, but I am done. I cannot continue like this. I was at home, I couldn't even contemplate working, and I just started to take matters really into my own hands. So what that looked like was I started to track all of my symptoms, and I would be noting down every food I was eating, and I'd have these big charts up on my kitchen wall with my 20 symptoms listed, and I would go and give them all a score out of 4, sort of 3 times a day. It really kind of progressed to quite obsessively focusing on what was going on and what might be triggering this. And I would note all the triggers as like potential triggers. I was looking at every food I was eating, and there was random ones like we lived near a fragrance and flavor factory, and I felt that I was worse when I could smell it in the air, and maybe that was poisoning me, and things like this. And I went down quite a spiral, and I remember thinking right at the start, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I was praying about this, and I remember hearing such a clear voice right at the start of this, which was along the lines of, don't focus on the symptoms, don't talk about them, it will only make it worse. In hindsight,
so
I
what
wish
was
I'd
the
listened to that,
outcome?
but I couldn't at the time.
Yeah. So
I'd
you're
left it.
tracking the symptoms, what you thought was a good idea.
Mm.
What was the outcome of that? Did it just generate further fear in you?
It did, because and very quickly I suddenly thought, gosh, I'm iller than I ever thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, shall I read my list of
Go on then.
symptoms I was tracking by that point? Because I found it so helpful listening to other people's stories. When I could hear a symptom that I was experiencing, I could kind of then check that off as a possible, I could solve this. So the number one thing that was debilitating across all of this time, and it got to such an excessive degree, was the brain fog. I'm somebody that likes to spend quite a lot of time in my head and thinking, and so almost the physical symptoms were nothing compared to this experience of not being able to hold a thought in my head. I got to the point where I couldn't go shopping because I couldn't work out what I was doing or what I needed to do. I couldn't work out what to do in a day. I couldn't hold a proper conversation with people. I remember just crying because I was trying to remember the word for like bathroom for my son, and I just couldn't think of how to communicate, go and wash your hands. I couldn't pray because I couldn't keep a thought in my head. And it lasted at that level for about a year. And that was really scary to me. On top of that, I had this delightful list. I had I would often feel this feeling like my head was full of pressure or liquid, and like blocked ears. And I now think that was probably some sort of sinusy kind of problem, headaches, and then dizziness that got very extreme. Um, rhinitis, like hay fever kind of symptoms, but so much at the time, and just getting quite ill very easily. Then this feeling like my throat was being squeezed and breathlessness. I'd pulsate tinnitus, abdominal pain, bloating, nausea at times, a level of exhaustion that, unless you've gone through it, you just can't communicate what it's like. But just the feeling like I couldn't do anything, that everything. I remember psyching myself up to pick something up off the floor or go up the stairs, just really like gathering my energy together to be able to climb the stairs. Um, Skin rashes, dermatographia, heart pain, kind of electric waves in my chest, feeling twitching eyes, which was a really weird one, and then blurred vision and feeling jittery. And I think that's about the list of them.
So I know
But
you had a number of medical investigations. Did they ever give you any medical diagnostic labels around these symptoms?
no, and because I hadn't had, I hadn't tested positive for COVID at the start of this. I had just had the vaccine a few weeks before, but I hadn't had a positive test. Nobody thought about long COVID. I think I'd considered it early on because I'd noticed a lot of these symptoms were within that list, but I hadn't. It wasn't considered medically until just before I kind of found the answer to all of this. But yeah, I think maybe it's worth saying that the other thing that looked like taking matters into my own hands that also was a big source of fear was I started to do a whole lot of research around what it could be, and I was chasing sort of, well, they weren't always dead ends, but it's chasing thing after thing. I mean, I'm a scientist, so I looked at all the papers but didn't find much there. So I found that I really turned towards other people's like anecdotal experience and what had worked for them. And I joined Facebook group after Facebook group. And in no matter what the later I realized no matter what the kind of Facebook group thing was, whether it was allergies to sulfites or oxalate issues or food-based ones or hormone issues, or I joined the Gilbert's support group, often people had the same symptoms, but there was no end of ways to try to address them. There were people restricting all sorts of elements of their diets, or they would say, take this expensive supplement or take these tests. And I really went down that rabbit hole, and I really started to restrict the food that I was eating, my diet. And the unfortunate thing in a way was I would get better for a while when I felt that I'd found the answer to my issues, and then things would come back worse. So then I would then keep that restriction in place. So, I was really concerned about sulfites at one point, or consuming dairy. And then I would add another restriction on top and another restriction on top. And I got to the point where if I look back at photos, I no longer recognize myself because I lost so much weight and I look so ill, in a way that I had never been when I was experiencing these symptoms without trying to tackle them through all these things. And I was spending a lot on supplements and tests and things like that. So I really felt that that was a turning point in my symptoms becoming worse and worse. And that lasted about a year, that process of really, I'd wake up every day and work on it. And I'd spend all my free time, especially when I could think straight, which wasn't always, all my time researching, and talking about it to my poor and very supportive husband, obsessing over what it could be and what I could try. So
So medically, there was no clear diagnostic label. Was it right that you started going down the POTS route at one point?
yes, and but that was sort of towards the end, and I because I was getting such dizziness when I was sort of lying to standing or crouching to standing. And I don't really know why it took them so long to suggest that I get tested for that, but I finally got an appointment through for testing for POTS. And then about 6 weeks before that appointment, I really found the cure for me. And by the time the appointment came along, I wasn't experiencing dizziness anymore. So I knew that it wouldn't be indicative of POTS by that point. So yeah.
So where are you at now in your life? Have you recovered? Do you still have these symptoms, or have they completely resolved?
So where I'm at now is I almost never experience symptoms, but I get I get a few niggly things here and there, but they, rather than ruling and dominating my life and being my life, they are short-lived and they're gentler, and I know what to do to deal with them. I wake up and I feel energy again, which I didn't feel for 3 years. And I'm not thinking about my health when I wake up and get out of bed, which again, it wasn't the case for about 3 years. I don't spend any time researching or thinking about this really, other than to kind of share what I learned with others. And maybe something nice to share is I was so ill for so long that I couldn't even consider having another baby, but I'm now pregnant and halfway through a healthy pregnancy.
Excellent,
And
congratulations.
feeling really well, other than all the first trimester normal symptoms.
And then what was the turning point for that change?
So the doctor had started to consider whether it was long COVID, and I had a great doctor at the time, and I just happened to. I mean, I'd done a bit of research around it, and I had I just happened to one day type into Spotify, and I'm so thankful for this. I just typed in long COVID recovery, and one podcast came up, which was from the podcast Cure for Chronic Pain, and it was the podcast with Gary. I can't remember his last name, but he was talking about how he recovered from a far more extreme version of the symptoms than I was experiencing. And I just knew that, I mean, I was so excited because I knew that this was the answer for me at last. And I think the main thing I took from the podcast was the understanding that all of these symptoms can be caused by your body being in a sustained state of fight or flight. And really thinking, about the autonomic nervous system. It has two wings to it. It has the sympathetic side, which is what kicks into gear when you have to run away from a bear or you're under extreme stress, and the parasympathetic side, which is responsible for the rest and digest state and really runs all the normal functioning of your body. And it talked about how if you get stuck in if your autonomic nervous system becomes dysregulated, you're stuck in a sense of fight or flight chronically, because the autonomic nervous system controls basically every function in your body. It has a hand in it. It's constantly fine-tuning it, whether it's your blood pressure or your heart rate, or even the things that are within your control, like your muscle movements. It's always tweaking them. It really does play a role in every part of your body. So if you are in the sustained state of fight or flight, then can have an impact on every part of your body, and that can show up as all of the symptoms. And I started to look at dysautonomia and looked at how all of the symptoms lined up with that. And it was such a relief to me. In part, so I'm a neuroscientist. I have a PhD in neuroscience, so it was really speaking my language. I felt I could resonate with it and understand it, and it was such a relief because it meant that recovery was possible. B, that I wasn't seriously ill. Sorry. I think actually I was really debilitating ill, but there was nothing permanently wrong with me. And this was at the time when they were talking about long COVID being like a permanent issue, there being bugs in your brain, or it permanently is affecting your immune system. I knew that we're constantly changing out of fight or flight into rest and digest mode. That's normal and it's reversible. and that I only had one job to do from then on, and that was help my body feel safe. And just that knowledge was enough to give me a sense of safety about my symptoms and not worry about them anymore, that I essentially recovered 80% overnight from listening to that single podcast. And to give you, I hadn't really explained, but I'd reached my crisis point in the month before this, and I was almost bedbound, really. We were moving house, which so that was unfortunate timing, and I didn't go to say goodbye to anyone because I was so unwell. My mum had come to look after me. I couldn't really go up and down the stairs. I had stopped all exercise. So, you know, in the few days after this podcast, I remember getting on my bike and cycling, a heavy toddler and lots of shopping a long way, and coming home, and I didn't crash in the way that I had been used to. And I just felt good. I felt good. And it was such a relief. And it was such a relief to, you know, I started going out to events and seeing people over those next few weeks. And I just felt like my life had come back. I felt alive again and well again. Yeah.
Were there other tools and resources that helped you in this journey?
So there really was. For that first few weeks, that was enough.
Yeah.
But then my symptoms started to return. Never as bad, but they did start to return. And it really began a journey of, you know, I'd have a wave of symptoms, then I get a bit better, then a wave of symptoms, and I get a bit better. And just have gradually climbed this mountain in the year since, to the point that I feel so much better, and things are very rare now. So I think the first time that happened, that symptoms came back, just happened to be my lovely family had come to stay, and I just started to get I think like the dizziness or something first, and then the next few days I'd get another few symptoms, and they were just going like dominoes, until by the end of the week I was back to what felt like square one. And I mean, I it really I then had to learn that there are two main sources of keeping your body in this fight or flight, or there are for me. One was driven by the symptoms themselves, because they were so scary that I was just perpetually in this place of fight or flight. I kind of addressed that part, but actually I hadn't gone deeper and looked at what are the underlying emotional drivers that might be keeping my system in a place of fight or flight. So my family had come to stay. I love them. I really wanted them to come to stay, but there was just a lot of people, and it was quite a lot. I take on a lot of pressure hosting. So over the course of the week, that pressure was enough to kind of trigger these symptoms again. So I then began this kind of slower work of delving into what is it that about my past experiences or my current experiences, and importantly for me, about my own personality that is just filling up this emotional reservoir too much, that it's starting to overflow. And I really I think you had Gigi, I can't remember her last name, on.
Gigi.
Yeah, and I've listened to a few podcasts that they're in, because she's brilliant, but she often talks about this fire alarm analogy, where the symptoms are the fire alarm, and there's no use focusing on them and targeting them. Really, the fire itself is often this emotional kind of reservoir and deeper work that you have to look at, that's causing you to feel in a place of fight or flight or stress and strain. And the main tool that I used for that was journaling. So I used Nichol Sacks's Journal Speak, where she talks about you set aside 20 minutes, you have a sheet of paper that you can destroy at the end, so that you can feel like you can write anything on it, you're not going to keep it, and you choose probably like a hot topic for you at that moment. She's got a bit more of a system to it than that, but that's how I use it. I just will write for 20 minutes, and so many times when my symptoms have been at their height and I've done that, they've actually gone away. So I think those those two tools were really key to me. And then really learning not to fear the symptoms coming back, because it's a horrible feeling when you've solved something, but just going, oh, there you are, you know, here you are, you're here to help me in a kind of misguided way. That's what my body feels is best. Often I feel like maybe it's not even just fight or flight, but it's actually the freeze response, our body going, you know, this world is dangerous, don't go out there, I'm going to shut you down, keep you in bed where you're safe. So kind of accepting my body's response to stress or being like that just takes the wind out of it and the weight out of it. And it means that, you know, if I can keep a kind of hold the symptoms loosely, I just don't go down the same rabbit hole. And I never have. They just last you know, a few days if I get them, really.
So if you could offer some sort of top tips or summarize what are your top tips for somebody who is just exploring this approach, what would it be?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there's so much that helps different people, but I think the number one thing to remember is you only have one job now. Once you understand this work and you really feel that your symptoms fall into this category, you have one job, and that is to help your body feel safe. And different methods will resonate for different people. You know, for some, breath work or somatic tracking might be the key to that. For me, it's been really important to remember, well, I think sort of three things really help me feel safe, and I've kind of talked about them, but to summarize them: knowledge therapy, so remembering and understanding this work and how big an impact being in fight or flight can have on your nervous system, and then your symptoms, just how powerful this effect is. And so I go back and I like read up on it, and I find that I have to top this up over time because I kind of forget with time. My number one tactic is I go back and listen to other people's stories, like this. And so if you could share your own story, please do, because there is, you know, the more stories out there, the more this can help people. Because I find just listening to someone's story is the easiest way I have to get myself back into a place of safety, because I don't have to do any work. It's quite enjoyable listening to someone, and just listening to them reminding me that recovery is possible and how this works, is enough usually to get me back into that place of safety. And then on top of that, with knowledge, this kind of knowledge, developing your own evidence base. So once I realized that this was what was going on for me, a key thing I did was I looked back over my years, and I could see how my symptoms tracked with how stressed or fearful I was. And the great thing is, even if you hear about this work, you hear about other people recovering from similar symptoms, you don't have to accept it all overnight for yourself. But actually, as soon as you can't unhear it, and I really believe that you will start to find your own evidence for it. You'll have moments where you're particularly stressed and you'll realize your symptoms are worse, or conversely, where you're in a place of real, like an enjoyable situation, and you realize, oh, I haven't even noticed my symptoms for that time, and gradually you build up evidence. So knowledge therapy, doing the deeper work, looking at what might be filling your emotional reservoir up, and triggering, just keeping your body in this place of fight or flight, and that, so I use journaling for that. And then finally, I think the outcome of looking at that is often working out that you haven't been putting things in your life that you need. So a key thing for me has been looking at my personality and how I've built this life that actually isn't quite aligning with that at all. You know, for example, I'm a massive extrovert, but I'm at home alone quite a lot of the time with a toddler. And yeah, just the simple things that you need. I think maybe another key thing is to, or on that, is to understand, and Nichol Sachs talks about this on her podcast quite a lot, that you can do things from either a place of fear or a place of love. So taking some dietary restrictions, you could do that because you want to care for your body and just really look after your digestion, and it comes from this place of love, and actually that would probably be good for your system. Conversely, I think it's so easy to start putting in restrictions from a place of fear, and that's what I did for years, and that just made, no matter what I did, even if it was better for, say, my digestion, it was restricting my life so much. And food is such a key social thing, and not being able to eat with other people or eat out or worrying about what I was eating all the time, that was such a source of fear to me. So making sure that whatever you're doing it from this place of love rather than fear. And then the final tip is just have an action plan in place for when symptoms come back, and expect them. Expect that's probably part of a normal part of recovery, which I didn't realize to start with, really. And have a plan for what you will do that's really easy to put in place. So when symptoms are at their utmost limit, I just step back and rest and try to do something enjoyable. I don't even try to think about any of this work or what I could do about it. I just say, enough. I'm just gonna rest. When things are reduced down, but they're still there, then I'd turn to a story like this. And that's all I'd do. I'd listen to that. It might be other things for other people. So have an action plan in place.
And so you mentioned Nichol Sachs. Were there other resources that you used, or did you kind of work this out for yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I should be mentioning your videos, which were really key for me, and particularly your webpage, because I came across it just at the point where I was going down I'm really hypermobile, and I had read the Ehlers-Danlos criteria and felt that I ticked it all, and I was starting to worry about that and whether that could be causing it. And I found your POTS UK page at that point that was just so key for me. And then I think the other person that really has been key was Rebeccca Desnos. She's got a lot of interviews, and Howard Schubner as well. And I'm really starting to learn more about this to be able to teach it myself. I'm currently training to become a practitioner in this work, so that I can then turn this story on its head and help others through it, because it's such a simple solution for such a debilitating thing in life. It's amazing.
So is there anything else that you feel that would be beneficial to say that you feel that you might have not covered so far?
I'll probably think of about 50 things after this call.
Maybe we need part two another
Yeah,
day.
no. I can put them in the comments section. No, just remembering that one thing: keep your body in a place of help your body to feel safe, and your focus isn't the symptoms, they're just the alarm
Okay,
signal.
well, we will stop there. Thank you so much. I'm very much in line with a lot of the other people I speak to. Everybody's kind of saying the same thing. So again, the more of these stories you listen to, the more you'll start to see the pattern,
Yeah.
and the penny will start to drop, because people are saying the same thing.
Yeah.